Okay, let's take a look at Explore number 2 of the history of life on Earth. Okay, go ahead and write down your template. Cornell Notes is what we're using here. Put your date, put your reference, Discovery Education, Living Earth Textbook, Unit 3, Concept 1, Explore number 2. And go ahead and write down the essential question: what are biological diversity, episodic speciation, and mass extinction? After you've written that down, hit the pause button and write down what you know, or, of course, what you think. Okay, hopefully it took a moment to do that. We're going to go ahead and start with Roman numeral 1, following the text there. We'll take this subtitle here, Biological Diversity. Diversity means to have variation, differences, and biological means life. In general, we're talking about things that relate to living things. So, what is biological diversity? It's the variety of life in an area. You may go to the North Pole and say it's not very biodiverse. You don't see many different types of plants, trees, and flowers. And you may see a few different animals, maybe not very frequently, not very biodiverse, right? Letter A, some areas, we could be talking about a ecosystem or a biome, for example, are very biodiverse. There are many different types of organisms in the area, whereas other areas are not biologically diverse. They're not very biodiverse. Generally, going with letter B here, most of our biodiversity is located along the equator. Remember, if you're talking about lines of latitude, the equator is at 0 degrees. So if you go 30 degrees north, if you go 30 degrees south, you have quite a bit of sunlight throughout the year. You have quite a bit of photosynthesis which occurs, a lot of different plant types. Remember, plants are producers, they're the foundation of the food web. So there's a lot of food, you're going to have a lot of animals, right? But as you move further north, as you get to higher lines of latitude, 30, 60, if you get all up to 90, your biodiversity decreases. It gets colder. There's times in the year where you have no sunlight at all. And that's the same even as you go in the opposite direction. 60 degrees south, 90 degrees south towards the South Pole is the same situation. So you have less biodiversity towards the poles, less biodiversity as you increase in numbers, increase your lines of latitude. Okay. Now, of course, talking about heat, talking about the amount of sunlight, these are natural stressors to environment that can lead to a decrease in biodiversity. But there's anthropogenic causes, referring to humans, genesis, genic, meaning a source or cause, right? So what do humans do that could lead to less biodiversity? Well, we tend to take over large amounts of earth, right? Leaving little room for other animals to have habitats. Our pollution can lead to disrupting biodiversity. Our cutting down of forest, deforestation, or farming practices where we disrupt the normal ecosystems and plant monoculture, where we plant just one type of plant. These are human-caused forms of loss of biodiversity. Okay. When we talk about an ecosystem being healthy, oftentimes you need to consider that refers to the biodiversity of that ecosystem. Okay. There's other things, of course, but think about that, okay? All right, so moving on to mass extinctions. And what is a mass extinction? Widespread rapid loss in biodiversity where large numbers of species cease to exist on Earth. Well, the majority of life forms that have been on this planet have already disappeared, right? We've had a good number of extinctions. Have we had many mass extinctions? Not really. We've had about 5 mass extinctions. And as you know, a mass extinction refers to many forms of life disappearing. So we didn't have a lot of life at 5, 4, 3 billion years, right? We really had diversification of life in the more recent billion years. So that's also where we see most of our mass extinctions. Okay, Roman numeral 2, talking about speciation and elaborating on extinction a little bit more. As you know, a species is a group of organisms that have the potential to breed together to produce fertile offspring. Humans are a species. They can reproduce with each other, they can produce children, and those children generally can be fertile and have kids of their own. So humans are a species. Um, are there non examples of species that we can give you? Well, there's the classic one. You have a female horse and she breeds with a male donkey. What do they produce? Well, they obviously are able to produce something, a mule. But the mule is not a species because it cannot reproduce. It is infertile, it's sterile. And that's an interesting thing about mules, right? So we just talked about species. So the process of forming new species is referred to as speciation. How do you go from one species to another? What are the requirements that can drive this? Well, you have to have barriers that prevent different populations from breeding, number one, right? Um, you may fall in love with somebody and have kids with somebody from a different state or a different country. Well, what happens when you become isolated, when an animal becomes isolated and cannot breed with other animals that are its own species? Well, when that happens, the populations are able to independently evolve. Okay. And independently evolve means that um, there's environmental stressors and they have unique traits that are selected for and allow them to survive. Well, can you get to the point where two different populations become so different? They behave so differently, or they uh, look so differently that they just don't breed with each other anymore? Sure, that can happen. And that is one of the mechanisms for speciation. Okay, speciation. You remember it. It can be slow. It can be fast. Right. Normally, we think of evolution as a slow process, but sometimes that's not the case. Okay. The term episodic speciation refers to this idea that you can have these slow and fast periods of speciation. They often follow catastrophes, disasters that kill a good number of life forms. That opens up the environment for new organisms to take advantage of those spaces, right? Those areas, those niches. Competition can also lead to extinction as well. It doesn't just have to be things like isolation. So, does extinction happen with regularity? Uh, I think what you're thinking and referring to when we ask that question is there a background extinction rate, a normal rate that things die off at? And there is. About one species per million die every year. Uh, on average, a species survives about 5 to 10 million years before going extinct. So if you think about humans, if we've been here 200 to 300,000 years, then the human species should go extinct in another 4.7, 4.8 million years, right? So there's nothing that says that humans are going to last forever, right? We may just be one more in a long line of organisms that disappear. Okay. When you have a rapid increase in the extinction rate, we call that mass extinction. We have gone through 5 mass extinctions. That is where more than 50% of the species die. Okay, so there you go. You can see we've had the Cretaceous Paleogene about 66 million years ago, thought to be an asteroid that was responsible for that, and over 75% of the species died. Before that was the Triassic Jurassic, and that was about 200 million years ago. It was due to volcanism, the idea that Pangaea was breaking apart perhaps at that time, an asteroid may be hit. In either case, about 75% of the species on Earth died, including your reptiles and most large amphibians. The third mass extinction is the Permian Triassic, about 252 million years ago, due perhaps to volcanism. 96% of the marine, right, ocean species and 70% of the land species die off. That's an interesting idea to think about, right? Okay, let's see here. Let's see, did we just talk about the Permian Triassic 252 million years ago? Volcanism responsible, 96% of marine species, 70% of land vertebrates die. So moving on to the last two, then we have the late Devonian mass extinction. Not really sure on the cause, but we know that about 70% of the species die off. And finally, we have the Ordovician Silurian mass extinction. This one happened about 445 million years ago, about half a billion years ago. Maybe it was due to supercontinents moving. Perhaps it had to do with the sea levels falling, being reduced. But we do know that approximately 60% of the species die in that case. All right, well, what else can be said here? Right, we've been going through these notes. There's your mass extinctions. Episodic speciation occurs after mass evolutionary extinction events. So when you have a mass extinction, that really sets the stage for rapid speciation. You see this period, this episode where new species form pretty quickly. And the very last note here, some scientists are convinced that we are going right now through a sixth mass extinction today, right now. The background extinction rate is estimated to be 100 to 1,000 times higher right now. Okay, so perhaps they're right. If that's the case, then we as humans need to really think about everything that we do. We need to think about it responsibly so that we don't cause irreparable damage to our ecosystems and biomes. Well, I think that does it for us. We've covered all the notes. You have a little bit of homework that we'll go ahead and be assigning to you. Go ahead and take a moment and write down a summary paragraph, and we'll talk to you soon.